Hey, brother.
What's going on, brother?
So before we get started, I know this subject is something that has been rattling around in your head for a couple weeks now, and that you want to put our spin on it or navigate our way through it. But I wondered just quickly, briefly, without going too in depth on it, what your thoughts are on the Ambassador Bridge and the Gordie Howe Bridge situation that's going on up in Detroit.
Well, I can understand both sides of this one. I really can. Right now you have a bridge, the Ambassador Bridge, that is owned by, American citizens. And right now, the United States benefits from that. And with the opening of the Gordie Howe, which is owned by a Canadian consortium, all of those proceeds.
Isn't it jointly owned? The United States and Canada own it 50-50, even though
That's a
Canada
good
paid for the
question. I'm
construction.
gonna look. I'm gonna look to the internet on that one because again, and this is one of the great things, and I think that this bears taking a moment to discuss. I think so much of this just depends on where you get your news source. It
Well,
depends on the link that you have when you go online. Right now, you know, the internet knows that I'm more conservative, and so I get the more conservative take on some of these things, and so I don't wind up getting the same stuff that you get. And so this made it seem like it was owned by who owns the Gordie Howe. Have I ever mentioned that Gordie Howe the third was in our small group at church? Did I ever mention that? So his grandfather is the Gordie Howe. I'm a huge Detroit Red Wing fan, as are you.
yeah,
And I just couldn't be happier that they named it the Gordie Howe Bridge. All
Kevin
right,
and I
here we
were just up for a game
by the
to watch him
Canadian
play.
federal government. Hold on. It is owned by the Canadian federal government and managed by the Windsor Detroit Bridge Authority through a public private partnership. The Windsor Bridge Authority is a nonprofit crown corporation wholly owned by the government of Canada. Nope, there is no American involvement in this whatsoever, according to my co-pilot search. Both the Windsor Detroit Bridge Authority and the actual owner of the bridge is the Canadian government, according to my Google search, and that's coming from Copilot. So, and that's what I had read before, and that's what I had heard was that, and I'm sure that's why the Trump administration wants to put a stop in this. It's another card to play in the ever expanding Canadian U.S. trade war, and I hate it. I don't like it. I do a lot of business in Canada. Some of my best friends are Canadian. Two of my biggest customers, Canadian, and I love those guys. And I do not like where this is going. It hurts me personally. It takes money out of my pocket when I can't, you know, work with my Canadian brethren. So I am not a fan at all of where this thing is going. I think it's on both sides. I don't think this is purely a Trump thing. I think the Canadians have taken advantage of this over the years. And so I think there's a middle ground that needs to be brought to. And I kept thinking that's where we're heading. And now it just seems like it's devolved into this ego thing. And I'm not a huge fan. In this
So
particular
CBS News reports that Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney said he spoke with Mr. Trump on Tuesday, explaining that Canada paid for the bridge and that the U.S. already has an ownership stake. So Canada is claiming that they built it, incurred all of the cost of it using American steel and Canadian steel, and that the United States already owns a an ownership stake in the bridge itself. And it's interesting that my point is that the Ambassador Bridge is owned by somebody who's friendly to the current administration and took a phone call with the Commerce Secretary or Lutnick, and then an hour later there was a phone call from Lutnick to Trump, and then an hour after that Trump declares that that bridge shouldn't open and that we're gonna hold off on this. The bridge has been under construction for how long? 3 years.
no, much longer than that. And it went
So
into
it's
the
not.
administration. Matter of fact, when this whole thing was starting, it was probably during Trump's first term. It's been around for a while. It's been in the
Yeah,
works
so
for a long.
none of this should come as a surprise to anybody as
Oh,
far
I don't think
as
rise to it. I just think it's another card that he's playing to try to force the Canadian government to bend to his will. Let's see.
okay.
Any in sorry, I'm asking it a different way just to see if I get an answer, a different answer. And so far, all right. So if I ask the question this way, does the USA have any ownership in the Gordie Howe Bridge? It comes back that the Gordie Howe International Bridge is owned by both Michigan and Canada. but it is primarily funded by Canada. While the bridge is a joint project, the U.S. has expressed concerns about its funding and ownership structure, particularly regarding the significant financial contributions from Canada. So I don't know. I don't know. I think it's just another card to be played. I really do. I think he's trying to force Canada to do what he wants, and Canada's not budging. Instead, Canada goes over and signs trade deals with China, more with Europe, kind of realigning, even though they do the vast majority, I want to say 90% of their exports go to the United States. If it's not 90, it's a very, very high percentage. It's in the 80s if it's not 90. And this is where their bread is buttered. It costs them so much less to put it in a truck and drive it across the border than it does to put it to get it to one of its ports on either one of its oceans, and then transport it via transport ship to China or to Europe. It makes no logical sense to get in a trade war with the United States. We are their defense. I wish that we could come to some type of common ground and make it work. I'm not saying that Trump is completely right, that the trade has definitely favored Canada in the past. I think it needs to come back, where it's more of a 50.
How much do you think the tariff structure played into the events that are taking place right now?
With the bridge.
Well, with the bridge, but with our relationship with Canada in general,
Oh,
our trade
oh,
relationship.
1,000, all of it. It's all of it, Mike. It's 100% of the issue. Canada's very, these people are very proud people, and they've taken it, to the nth degree. I'll tell you a quick story. I was in Edmonton. I was with my customer. He wanted to stop by and buy a lighter because he wanted to smoke a cigar later in that evening. This was just this past summer, and he ran in to buy a lighter. And when he walked up to the counter at this gas station, the young lady behind the counter, and I'm watching it from our Uber, and I can see the woman and my customer talking, and she hands him a lighter, and the lighter happened to be a Canadian lighter. It had the big, the Canadian flag on the lighter. And he goes, "Well, you're not an American, are you?" And he goes, "No, but the guy in the cab is." And I saw her lean over the counter and stare at me, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. And then she made like a fist in that and pulled back. And when my customer got back in the car, he said, "Yeah, the woman in the gas station wants to fight you." Not going to fight the cash attendant at the gas station because she's angry with the United States. But you can see it. You can see it when you go into a liquor store, and there's no American liquor whatsoever. The shelves are literally empty where they would have had Jack Daniels or any of our the great names that we have in liquor and stuff like that. So it's both sides have taken it up to an unhealthy level, and it's really hurting the steel fabrication market in Canada. Great companies like Can-Am don't have the workload that they used to because a lot of the steel they were manufacturing, that they were fabricating, went to the United States, and again, that hurts everybody. This is not a good thing. It's not a healthy thing, and it needs to end. The egos need to be put aside, and we need to find
You're
out.
seeing it play out on national TV during the coverage of the Olympics.
Oh, you saw it. You saw it with JD fans getting booed. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you see it
See
being
what
played out at NATO. You see it being played out there. You see it being played out all over the place.
you're
When you're
saying
trying to
Canadian
have,
fans getting booed? Canadian athletes getting booed?
I'm sorry.
You're saying that your take was that it was the Canadian athletes that were getting
No,
booed
no,
at
no,
the
no, no.
Olympics?
It was American athletes and JD Vance. JD Vance got booed, our vice president.
Gotcha.
That came across as Canadian. I didn't mean it for it to be. No, I was saying JD Vance was booed when he showed up.
Gotcha.
So no, there's no backlash to Canadians. No one ever gets mad at Canadians. They're just the nicest people in the world. They really are. They're wonderful people. So there's not one Canadian that I know that I don't love. There's not one. They're all just fantastic people right down the board. Anyway, so all that to say, when you're going to reestablish trade negotiations, you're messing with people's pocketbook, and when you mess with people's pocketbooks, they're going to get angry. And so I think a lot of this was kind of a natural thing. Trump wanted to restructure all these deals. He wanted to make it so America was first, and he's ruffled a lot of feathers, and none more so than the Canadians. I think when you look at how the Japanese have handled it, how England's handled it, I think they realized that Trump was in a very good negotiating position. And you know what? They went in there and they took their lumps, and they renegotiated, and we're moving on, and everything's really good with those countries. Canada took a different position. I think they figured they had a better hand to play. So we'll see how this goes. It's not good for either country.
Well, no. I mean, there are no winners in this when it's a war, not really a war of attrition, but a war that's playing out in real time on TV in front of everybody, and we all get an inside look at what's going on.
It's I believe that it's the longest border shared by two neighboring countries in the world. The Canadian-US border. It's just mammoth. They've been our every time we've gone to fight, they've come with us. Every single time they've been arm in arm with us. I believe very strongly in our relationship with the Canadians, and this will settle down. We'll be better.
So,
This is going to be it's a nasty
so why
one,
would you
but
pick a fight? I mean, why? Clearly, we were the ones that were you're going to be our 51st state. It all started with this sort of, well, he was joking about them being our 51st state. Well, it's clearly they don't think it's funny or that it's a joke. And rather than back that down and de-escalate that, he throttles it up and imposes the tariffs and threatens to close a bridge that they built and we get revenue from. And I just wonder, what's the end game?
we were not going to get anywhere near the revenue that we were getting from the Ambassador Bridge, which was an American bridge, and when we got a lot of money from that bridge. So with a lot of that traffic being put into or through the Gordie Howe, it was going to be a blow. There's no doubt about it. I mean, it's very clear that the Canadians were going to wind up winning with the opening of the Gordie Howe Bridge and the amount of traffic that it was going to take. It's one of the busiest bridges in all of North America, or it will be. So I understand kind of where it's coming from. And yes, the rhetoric is not good, and I'm not happy with the rhetoric coming from Trump. But Trump is right in a lot of things. The trade practices, the way that they kept out so many different American exports to Canada to protect their industries was not right. I mean, and so I think some of those things, and I watched that stuff happen. I watched it happen when I was in Boston a couple of years ago, and they were very upset the fact that they would not take American lobsters up there because they wanted to protect the Canadian lobsters, which is nowhere near the size of our lobster industry, but it doesn't matter. So they put untold tariffs on it to keep ours out. It's just little things like that. He wants more of an even playing field. And I think when you look at it, we're going to win some, they're going to win some. That's the way it should be. It shouldn't be the Canadians being able to dictate to the much larger economy. I mean, when you look at it, I want to say it's like what, 37 trillion to 2 trillion, something like that, maybe 3 trillion. I mean, when you look at the gross domestic products, we should probably have a bigger say. But let's just forget that. Let's go with what's right. Let's go with 50-50. So he has a legitimate point. I really believe that Trump has a point on this one. So I don't like the way that it's playing out. I think it's much nastier than it needs to be. Yes, you don't have to joke about the first date. And at the end of this, he probably cost Canada or the Conservative Party in Canada that election by coming out that morning and doubling down on the first date and all of that rhetoric the morning of the election. So yeah, it didn't play out well. It didn't, and it wasn't taken very well.
I'm going to have to study the economics of how a 37 trillion versus a $2 trillion economy needs to be 50-50. I don't know how to, I can't juxtapose those two numbers and then say it needs to be, I mean, how do you make it 50-50 when our
No, no, no.
economy is,
I don't mean 50-50 in dollars, like dollar for dollar. And pardon me if I said that wrong. I'm talking about with trade practices, with tariffs, with what we're doing. Either we're going to open this up and it needs to be free and clear trade. That's probably not going to happen because we don't live in a perfect society. So there's going to be some tariffs put. There's going to be some protectionism that goes into this stuff. So let's just keep it even. Let's do it tit for tat. Let's do a little back and forth. And that's not what's happening. Clearly, the Canadians have an advantage when it comes to a lot of these trade practices.
how much do you think, so Canada, and forgive me, I'm not a student of the economy of Canada, but I look at Canada as a predominantly agricultural country up there. Their livestock and food and the stuff that they grow and the seas that they fish in. That to me that seems like they're not as industrialized in their economy as what the United States is, and they lean more heavily.
I said certainly not. No, they. When you look at it though, they're very very robust. When you look at their timber industry, which is huge, which you'd expect. They have a huge automotive sector. They have a very robust steel sector. There's a number of industries that they compete in, toe to toe with the United States, and they do very well. Now, these tariffs could absolutely destroy that, and you can see the way that China and Canada kind of played that game when it comes to like EVs, EV batteries, and EV cars, and that technology is the new wave of the future type of thing. And the Canadian government has subsidized that so heavily in China that they can make a car way cheaper than anybody else. Tesla can't compete. The Germans can't compete. VW, all these great companies between Europe and North America cannot compete with China because they've subsidized that industry so heavily in China. And so the United States said, nope, we're not taking it. All your EV cars, because you're not going to come here and sell it for half the price of Tesla and drive Tesla out of business. That is not in our national interest. So we're not going to do it. So what China just did by going over there and having these negotiations, like, you know what? Yeah, we'll take a bunch of your EVs. We'll take them in. We'll take 50,000 of them. Well, how many of those EVs are now going to wind up because of the low tariffs between Canada and the United States instead of the huge tariffs that were going on between China and the United States on EVs specifically to drive them out of our market? Now they could just bring them down through Canada. That's the type of trade practices that are going on. This is not just America bad, Canada good. This is a back and forth little scuffle that's going on between the two countries. I think Trump is doing this to preserve not just our economy, but our military and our national interests. Because when you look at the control that China has on rare earth metals and all these types of things, we used to dominate rare earth metals. And rare earth is such a weird thing because it's not like they're finite. Well, everything's finite like that. It's not like they're rare. They're just difficult to process. And when I say difficult, really bad for the yes, and really, really bad for the environment. So we didn't love processing all that stuff. It's not good for our rivers. It's not good for air quality, all those types of things. But China was allowed to come in and buy some of the companies that we had in the United States that did a lot of this stuff. We pioneered a lot of this technology. We pioneered the way that this stuff was extracted and processed and everything like that. China came in, was allowed to buy some of these companies, and then they ran them for a couple of years, figured out how to do everything, shut those down, took all the equipment, shipped it over to China, and then started building up that industry. And now they control the entire supply line for all of these metals. Some of the things that Trump is doing had to be done. I know that he's not likable for a lot of people. I know that he doesn't do things the way that you and I would like him to do it, and do it in a nice way, and do it in an inclusive way, do it in more, a moral way. But he doesn't. But some of the stuff he's doing really needs to be done. So I know sometimes I got to hold my nose and say, yeah, go do that. So as we move into this next,
I wish we would. I wish we'd hit the pause button on lesser of two evils. Hold my nose. We have to take some of the good with the bad. That is such a. I'm sorry, I don't like that argument. You're either all in and you believe in this candidate and that's who you voted for, and you have to take the good with the bad, or you don't. And
but
that's
Mike,
where you and I.
more complicated than that. You know that if you've got two candidates and both of them are awful candidates, you have to vote for one of them. You have to vote. I mean, I believe in my right to vote, and so I'm going to always go vote. And one candidate rarely encompasses everything that I believe, because there are parts of the Democratic Party I really like. I consider myself a conservative, and when I look at it, I am more aligned with the Republican Party. So a lot of times I wind up voting, most of the time. Sometimes I vote for the Republican candidate. But that doesn't mean that I believe everything that they believe. It doesn't mean so to say that I have to believe in that candidate completely. I'm never going
Not
to.
completely.
Candidate I've ever voted for that I 100%, not one. So I understand where you're coming from, because I think Trump is such a divisive individual, but at the same time, I don't know. I think two things can be true here. I cannot like a lot of the stuff that Trump does. I can also believe in a lot of the things that he's doing.
All right.
All right.
We'll
So and this, I think that brings up this point that needs to be made, and that is one. As we start this, I have no idea what your opinion is on what's going on in Minnesota with the fraud that's happening there. So I think it's an important subject for us to hit on. I think I'm looking forward to jumping into this one. But that being said, I just want it noted. I truly respect your opinion. I respect your intellect. I respect your faith. I respect your heart. And I can disagree with you, and I can think differently, because I think we I think you and I just have kind of a different kind of worldview. I don't think one of us is more Christian or less Christian because of our view. It's just our view. But I know your heart, and I know your heart is pure, and I know that you love Jesus. So I will respect your opinion no matter what your opinion is on all of this. So I'm just looking forward to this because I think it's such an interesting thing that's happening. And as we start off this thing, I think there's two different ways to look at this particular subject. And I'm curious because one of them is as an American and looking for what's right for our economy, for our citizens, for our social welfare programs, and for the people that the money that comes out of our tax dollars and pays for all these social programs. There's one piece of it there, and I have a very strong opinion on that. And then there's another side that, as a Christian, what should we do to help out people that are less fortunate and people that are in a very difficult situation? So I think there's two different subjects here. I think they're very linked, and I do have strong opinions on this. So I'll be very curious to kind of hear your opinion. So I've done a lot of talking, so I'll throw it out to you. As you've looked at this subject, what are your initial thoughts?
Well, two things from this side of the table going leading into this is I think we're going to find after this conversation that you and I probably agree on more on this subject than what either one of us thinks the other one is going to lean in on. So I think we're going to find common ground on quite a bit of this. Nobody wants fraud. Nobody wants $205 billion in government money being used for purposes that they weren't intended for. Nobody wants that, because what that means is that there are people out there that should be getting help that those funds aren't available to,
Uh,
and they can't have their heat stay on or their kids fed or their families clothed because the funds that should have gone to them are being used to buy luxury items and boats. And but I think the proper way to solve, and again, it always comes down to, at least for me, yeah, the end game is we need to repair a wrong that's going on. That's obvious, should be obvious to everybody. But yeah, there's something going on in Minnesota that needs to be righted. It's how we go about doing it, and cutting off funding to all social programs. Uh, Hang on a second.
our sister, our sister calls in the middle. Getting back into it. By the way, the U.S. Olympic hockey team just absolutely crushed Latvia today, setting up.
Yeah, but
You
it's
know,
Latvia. I mean, we drew a pretty good draw as far as we start on the second night, so they get their feet under them, get a night in the Olympic Village. They kind of start to feel a rhythm, so they benefit from playing in a later game. And their opening game is against Latvia. How many NHL players are playing for Latvia?
hmm, some, some good young stars. Yeah, you can see the one they had one really young player today, and he chased Kachuk behind the goal and set up just a beautiful goal. It was an absolute thing of beauty. I don't know if you know who Brock Nelson is, but the guy's just an old journeyman who has a grandfather and uncle that played on the 1960 U.S. Olympic gold medal winning team, and then also his dad played on the 1980 U.S. Olympic team, and he scored two today and had two others that were disallowed.
Six what?
Hey, thank you. Six NHL.
Having a producer is like the best thing in the world. It's like
It's awesome.
information,
Yes.
information at your fingertips.
All right, let's get back in. So I don't know. Have you had a chance to watch any of the hearings that they had on some of the Somali fraud?
No, so I figured on this subject I was going to play the antagonist, get you going on some of these subjects. I did a little bit of research on like this Amy Bach, who is the leader of the Feeding Our Future charity that is the largest of the fraud scandals so far, monetarily $250 million fraud, and she's recruiting Somalian families to form these charity feeding pro kitchens and soup kitchens on behalf and taking the funding. And then so but she's not Somalian. She's an American woman who
That's right.
her and another guy are the ones that sort of set this up and began this fraud scandal. And but I think the root cause of what we're seeing right now is the fact that the state of Minnesota turned over administrative duties of these food programs to a third party entity, company, charity, uh, and I think that's where most fraud problems start, when oversight and government control of the funds get handed over to or farmed out to a third party, non-interested or disinterested party, and then you lose track of accountability and who's doing what. And the further you spread control out over multiple groups or multiple charities, the easier it is to shift those funds back and forth and hide what you're doing. And I think if Minnesota is guilty of anything to begin with, it's that it's that during the COVID pandemic, they turned over control of their feeding program and their charity to a third party organization and allowed this to happen. So I think when you start with that, it's quick to say Somalis came into this country and took over the fraud game in our country. I think that's a little short sighted, in that this took place before the Somalis got here. It will be here long after this fraud gets taken care of. Well, I mean, what's
Please.
the argument?
So, a couple things. One, this is what happens when you open up your borders and there are no controls. This is what happens when people aren't vetted. This is what happens when we just let people in and we completely open borders. It causes these types of problems. You let in people that probably wouldn't get in if they had to go through the normal process. And when we talk about, and I referred to it our last podcast, the strength of the US as a nation has always been our immigrants. We are all immigrants in one way or another. Even going back to the Native Americans. Native Americans moved around a lot. It's not like they stayed in one place and they were from the Detroit area and stayed in the Detroit area. These were kind of nomadic people. They moved around, they followed each other, they took land, all that other stuff. So when you look at it, everybody in this country has been an immigrant in one way or another. And that Native Americans have a lot of claim to it. I'm not trying to take that away. I'm just saying that even they moved around a lot. So when you look at that, that is a strength, but you need to have controls on it. You need to protect the sovereignty of your country. That didn't happen. We just let people in unvetted, and so you got a lot of people that shouldn't be here. There's more than one stage to this fraud. You've got the piece where they're going through and taking it from the food distribution program. Yes, feed children. What was the name of the fund you were talking about?
Feeding our future or feed our
Feeding our
future?
That's a big one because you're talking about feeding children, and that turned into a huge fraud thing. You also have the daycare centers. You also had the emergency transportation. There's a few other programs in there, home daycare or home health care. So you had all these different programs that were happening. Right now, the Office of Governmental Operations, the GAO, is right now estimating that somewhere in the neighborhood of 50% of and I want to make sure I get this number right, $18 billion of federal money that has gone to Minnesota since 2018 has been stolen, has been part of fraud from all these different sources. And yes, there are certainly people that were born here and raised here that aren't Somali or immigrant that came here from Somalia or was of Somali ancestry and born here. There are other people involved, but the vast majority of the people involved in all of this fraud come from Somali. And here's some of the statistics to go up against that, the thought process that you have. When you look at Somalis compared to people of non-Somali ethnicity in Minneapolis or in Minnesota, when you look at food stamps, 54% of Somalis are on food stamps compared with 7% of Minnesotans that are not of Somali descent. Medicaid, 73% of Somalis are on Medicaid compared to 18% of non-Somalis. When you just look at overall welfare, 81% of Somalis are on welfare. When you look at people, and some people say, well, it takes people time when they come over here, they need to get on their feet. Okay, great. Let's just look at Somalis that have been here more than 10 years. 78% of them are still on welfare after 10 years in this country. That's an issue. And when you look at it, the other thing we talk about is assimilation. You should learn the language. You should learn the customs. You should want to become part of our society, especially if you're on government assistance, because you're basically at that point surviving on the taxpayer's dime. You're not even earning that money. You're being handed that money. Nearly
So let me ask
50.
you, can we pause right there for a second?
Sure, absolutely.
Because assimilation, I struggle with that because when your ancestors and mine moved over onto LaGrange, or the number of Polish people that live in Rossford that came over with the LOF float line on the river, and they assimilated into their own culture in Rossford and on LaGrange and Elm and Stickney. They weren't learning our language. They were cooking their food in their restaurants in their neighborhoods and speaking their language. St. Adalbert's and St. Hedwig's churches became popular with the Polish community because they spoke the masses in Polish. Chinatown or Hunky Town, you'll go down on Front Street and Birmingham is all Hungarian because those people look for, they're not trying to assimilate into being Americans. They're looking for a place to feel comfortable and where they hear their native tongue and can taste their native food. And we celebrate that. We have festivals celebrating the German American Festival out in Oregon at a park every summer. We're not celebrating the fact that those are Germans that are living in America and becoming Americans and singing our songs and eating our hot dogs. And we're celebrating the fact that they make and
The
cabbage
fabric
and
of America. I
well,
100%
all
agree.
I'm saying is
I'm saying
don't fight
that's
it. We should celebrate it.
that wasn't sarcasm. I totally agree with you. The difference is, Mike, let's talk about grandma. Yes, her parents came over. They were older. They knew Polish, but she learned English. English was being taught in the schools that she went to. And grandma could speak Polish, of course she could, but she also learned English. And she spoke it fluently, and that's what we spoke to her when we were in the house. Yes, we learned Polish swear words from her. When she was mad, she didn't want to swear at us in a language we understood. So when she swore at us, she swore at us in Polish. So the only words we knew in Polish were the swear words, which I think is kind of funny. But they assimilated. They became part of our country. And you know what else? When you look at those Italian immigrants, when you look at the German immigrants, when you look at the Greek immigrants that came over, they they built New York. They came here to go to work. They came here to add to our society. They came here to become American. And yes, you'll always want to go to where people, if I moved to a foreign country, especially a foreign country that didn't speak English, I would want to find where the most people spoke English to help me assimilate, to help me kind of figure out what's going on, to get that comfort level. Yes, 100%. That's not wrong. But when you go to these Somali communities, all the signs are in Somali. They're not even making an effort. There's no effort there. They have a disdain for our culture. And that's an issue. And
Well,
to come
you
here,
don't think that's a leap to say that because they don't speak our language, they have disdain for our culture?
no,
That's kind of a, I
the
mean,
the
that's a,
leap would be what they say about us. Right down to Ilhan Omar, who is a Somali congresswoman from that district over there in Minneapolis, in Minnesota. Listen to her speeches. She is openly agitated with the United States. And the Somali leaders come out and specifically talk about how great the Somali people are and how awesome that culture is and how corrupt and backwards ours is. It's kind of ugly. It's kind of frustrating, especially when you look at the statistics of what's going on. This is something I found really interesting. And this came out of a study done in the Netherlands. And I was absolutely blown away by this. So they were just looking at, and again, this is not something I want to come across as racist or anything like that. This is just a study that was done by the Netherlands. When they did a study on the productivity over a lifetime of people that moved into their country from other cultures, this is what they found over an extendedly long period of time. People that came from North America would produce somewhere in the neighborhood of $573,000 during their working lifetime. Those from Scandinavia that moved to the Netherlands produced $557,000 over their lifetime of employment. Oceania, 476,000. Japan, England, 481,000. These people moved there, they assimilated the best they could, and they worked. Now, yes, a lot of people in the Netherlands speak English, so I think there is a benefit there. I'm not discounting that. But now cross-reference that to the people from the Middle East that moved there, negative $624,000. They cost that society $624,000 during their working ages. In the Caribbean, $675,000 lost. Central Africa, 700,000. Sub-Saharan, $730,000 lost. These are all negative numbers. And Somalia, the worst, $1.1 million. That's their average. That's what the average Somali moving to the Netherlands cost them over their working lifetime. $1.1 million.
So then what should be a question that brings to the back of your mind when you hear those numbers, and those numbers are clearly, you know, they're telling a story, but doesn't your mind want to know when they were in their own country before they emigrated, before they left, what was the taxable income, or what were they doing in their economy in their country when they were there assimilating with their own people in their own country?
And that's a great point, Mike. I 100% agree. I believe that has a big influence.
Well,
When you
when you
look at
take somebody
farm,
out of a culture that they are literally farming for their own food and sustaining themselves day by day and walking miles to get clean drinking water and just trying to survive on what they can ladle out of a pot. And I'm I don't know what the daily life of a Somalian is, and maybe I'm painting this in too narrow of a line. But in my mind, I think, okay, so what I want to know is if you're costing a Nordic country $1.2 million over your working lifetime, what were you doing for your own economy in your own country? And when you emigrated from there, what was the reason why you emigrated to the United States or to Central America or to the Nordic, Norway? And when you went there, what was your purpose for going there? What were you promised? What were you looking for? What were you trying to achieve when you left? And then your negative impact on that economy, is that because you're not educated, because you never went to school when you were in Somalia? So when you enter an industrialized civilization and you're trying to find gainful employment and you don't have any work skills that you take with you, that people who emigrate from Germany to Norway, certainly they have an advantage. People that come from the United States and move to the Netherlands, certainly they're going to have a resume that's already printed out and 20 copies of it because they're looking for a job that meets their criteria. Somalians are likely not, and I'm not defending or carrying the torch for them. All I'm saying is, when I hear those numbers, my first question is, okay, what were they doing in their home economy before they left to go to the Netherlands to infect or have an impact on their economy? Because I think that's the whole story. I think you're going to find more about the reason why Somalians in Minnesota are on welfare and costing us. I mean, they're not assimilating. They're not speaking our language. They're not working in our economy. They're paying taxes, because I can tell you 75% of them pay income tax to the state of Minnesota. 72 or 75, I think I read. So it's not like they're sitting over there and none of them are working and they all picked Minnesota to move to for whatever reason. I'm not sure. It can't be the sunny weather that they get in Minneapolis in the wintertime. They're coming from Somalia, a very tropical environment, and they choose to move to Minnesota. Why? So what's the whole story? It's great to
all
hear
right,
these numbers.
let's look at that. Let's look at why. It's a sanctuary city. Minneapolis, St. Paul is.
They're the
And
only sanctuary city.
of course not. But they have a very specific thing that I think draws a lot of people too. They are very big on social programs, and they are very big on electing Democrats in that area. And one of the things you'll see is that the Somali community, they heavily, heavily support the Democratic Party, to the point where they have
We better get
recordings
them
of.
out of there then.
Let me finish. I was very respectful. Let me finish. That where they're saying, if you want our help, our continued help, if you want our support to just keep electing Democratic members of Congress and city council and mayor and everything like that, you got to help us. You got to get us out of this. It's a very clear voting block that they have brought in to Minneapolis. But when you made an earlier point, you were talking about that life back in Somalia, the corruption that's going on in Minnesota, just Minnesota, because this is going on in Somali communities in the state of Washington. It's going on in Somali communities in Maine. It's going on in Somali communities in Columbus, which Columbus, Ohio, our home state. You might claim Michigan, but you were born in Ohio, right? Weren't you at another Toledo hospital? Yeah. So you're Ohio. So our home state of Ohio has the second largest Somali community in the country. It's somewhere in the neighborhood of 70, maybe 80,000 Somalis live just outside of or and in Columbus, Ohio. So it's not just happening in Minneapolis. But when you look at the corruption just going on in Minnesota, it's equivalent to the gross domestic product of Somalia. That's how big the corruption is. And when you look at
Or how
what is
small the economy is in Somalia.
what's that?
I said it's either indicative of the level of fraud in Minneapolis or how small the economy and gross
Both,
national product of Somalia is.
both, 100%. So there's two things. So I do understand what you're saying, but at the same time, it also tells you the massive scope of what's going on in regards to the corruption. And the other problem that you have in Somali, you have the warlords, you have the Somali pirates that went off and started to claim ships and hold people ransom and steal cargo and do all the stuff that they were doing there. It's a community that's kind of based on corruption. There is a lot of corruption going on in Somalia. So to move here and think that there was going to be no corruption is probably foolhardy. And the only thing that I would say about that is these individuals that are coming here without the Western education, without the Western culture, without the Western moral code, without any of that culture, are they compatible with our society? And that's where the Christianity piece comes in, because I don't want to sit here and just look at numbers. I don't want to just sit here and look at education level and say, you don't belong. I don't want to do that. I see all of this and I get angry because I see my tax dollars that should be going towards, to your point earlier, that should be going towards wounded veterans, that should be going for children that have autism, because that was another big corruption piece. They were taking this money from children that had autism and they were trying to get, well, I know you don't have autism, but boy, we want your child to be part of this program. So we'll give you money. We'll take our cut, all that stuff that was going on, feeding children, daycare centers, all these things they're really good. And they were meant to be millions of dollars going into these things. And instead we wind up pouring billions of dollars so that so much of this could be stolen. And it was protected by the government there in Minnesota. When whistleblowers came to Walz's administration, Walz shut them down. Whistleblower after whistleblower have come forward now saying, I brought this to Walz, I brought this to his team, and I was told to leave it alone. That's bad. That's bad. And how many people, one of the biggest, that those restaurants that were supposed to be feeding all these people, one of the biggest corruption, areas happened at this restaurant. And there's pictures of Ilhan Omar with this guy. And he contributed to her campaign, and he contributed to Walz's campaign, and he contributed to all these other campaigns. So the Democratic Party was specifically getting money from this fraud. And when it was brought to them to dispose, of all this and to put a stop to it, they shut it down. Yes, the federal government came in and did prosecute some people, but it was a very small piece. And now all of a sudden, Walz is like trying to jump in and help. It's way too little, way too late. This corruption stinks. And the way that you kind of know that it stinks, Walz all of a sudden steps down from his gubernatorial campaign because he knows he's in the middle of it, and he's going to hurt the Democratic Party if he keeps trying to run with all this fraud going on. It's ugly. It's really ugly. This entire thing is one of the most frustrating things. But anyway, going back to it, as a Christian, I want to be able to look past this and say there are a lot of good Somalis. So we have checks and balances in place. We have an immigration policy. And this is a war-torn country. Somalia has been in the middle of a civil war for as long back as I can remember. And it doesn't seem to really get much better. There is asylum. There are legal ways to go about it, but people should come in legally. People should come in and be vetted. And I think if we do that, then we're not in the situation that we're in. First of all, there's probably not 100,000 Somalis in Minneapolis if they went through the proper channels. It's probably a fraction of that number. And so right away, it brings it down. You look at all that learning center stuff, and a lot of these daycare centers are sitting in the middle of really crime-ridden areas, in the middle of an industrial area. And they've got this building, and some of these addresses would have multiple daycare centers assigned to them, each one of them having somewhere between 30 and 99 kids. Their timing is all off, and there's laws that govern the timing of these things being open, of these daycares, and how long they're open, the 24 hours that they're supposed to be open from like 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. There's a specific certification that you have if you're going to be open from 6 a.m. until 6 p.m. And so for them to come out and say, well, we're open at 2 o'clock, and then they bust a bunch of kids in so they can show it on camera, and it's all that garbage going on. It's just fraud on top of fraud. And it's just, the entire thing is so frustrating to see that stuff going on. And so at the end of this, as a Christian, how am I supposed to take this? I mean, give Caesar what is Caesar's. Those are our tax dollars. Am I upset about that? Is this righteous indignation? Is this Jesus flipping over a table? Or do I think less of an individual Somali because all of this is going on, and it's almost all of it is from the Somali community? And they seem to have targeted these blue states and these individual areas that are sanctuary cities or run by Democrats who allow these open borders to happen and then allow this corruption to take place. And so I want to be able to process this as a Christian and do that. How do I do that? How do I process this in such a way that I'm honoring Christ and not being angry at an entire community of people when it's not what I've met individual people from Somalia that are wonderful people. They're hardworking, they're assimilated, they speak wonderful English. They go against all of this, and they're probably not involved in a single bit of fraud. So I know those individuals exist. So how do I look at all this stuff that we've been going over, and how as a Christian do I process this? And I don't want to be that person who disregards an entire country of people, because at the end of the day, Jesus loves every one of them every bit as much as he loves my wife, my pastor, my family, and died on a cross for every single one of them. How do I process this?
I think Jesus is the one that sorts through the legalities, and we're called on to love on behalf of Christ. I mean, that's our mission. That's what Jesus wants us to do. Jesus was an immigrant himself. I mean, he traveled into lands that weren't his and paid, was punished for it, and his followers were punished for it. And I don't think you get bogged down, and because I think in order for you to focus so heavily, not you, but in order for society to focus so heavily on the Somalian impact on the city of Minneapolis, it takes some setting aside of what Jesus has for us to do for these people, and that is to love them on behalf of him. We're to be the hands and feet of Jesus in this world, and we're to love on behalf of him. I think that's where that's to snap the chalk line and say, let them sort out, let the people that we put in charge sort out what's going on. My job is to love others and be that light that Jesus wants me to be.
Can
You
we
can't be
love
a
and
light
still
and cover your eyes, but the legality of it and the fraud of it, you let that stuff work itself out. And as a Christian, I choose to do what Jesus wants me to do, and that is play my role in this, support them. When I was hungry, you fed me. When I was naked, you clothed me. When I was in prison, you visited me. I don't think that was just for a placard or a card. I think Jesus, you know, that message was so intentional and so incisive and so surgical, because it was going to speak to what we all feel when we walk through this life, the people that we come in contact with. Yeah, I don't agree with other cultures and how they do things. I don't understand it. I don't walk that walk, but in spite of all that, I love them because Jesus loved them first. And as a church, I think we're the first ones that people look to in crisis. It was the church when COVID broke out that was trying to find a need and fill the gap and bridge those areas where the government couldn't respond as quickly as a private citizen led effort could, because we don't have the restrictions and the red tape and the legal stuff that we have to go through. We can be more responsive because we can throw stuff in the trunk of the car and drive down to a food shelter and feed people that just need to be fed. That's the kind of Christian I want to be. I don't want to spend time in the trying to figure out, like, I wonder how much time we've spent exploring the statistics on the Somali community in Columbus or any red state. Is this something that's specific, and the numbers prove out that in blue states the fraud is rampant, and in red states they've wrestled it
Oh
down to the
no,
ground?
No, 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 no. The fraud in Columbus might, and they're in the process of trying to, investigate all of this. They're saying that the fraud in Columbus might even be bigger than the fraud going on in Minneapolis. It's huge. So it's not red state, blue state. It's who's in charge locally, what's going on, who's giving the funds out. Columbus is a very blue city in the middle of a very red state. So Columbus, Ohio is another one of those cities that has allowed this to absolutely run rampant. And like I said, 70,000 Somalis are now inhabiting the greater Columbus area. And it's every bit as bad as Minneapolis.
And I find it hard to believe that it's not a red blue issue when everything is a red and blue issue right now. Everything is politically divided. There is a Red Sea parting with what's on the left and what's on the right. And if you're on the right, you can't have any ties to the left because then you're hypocritical or you're non-understanding or you're a conspiracy theorist. Or at no time in recent history since Jimmy Carter came to start high school in my sophomore year, and
I
since
remember going.
from that day till this day, I don't think we as a country have ever been more politically divided. President Trump is the president for the Republican Party and those that vote for him. He has said so. I don't need your vote. I don't really care about you. The people that are voting for me are the ones that I am going to legislate for. So if that divide is so vast right now that even in our own churches there are people that are Democrat and Republican that don't feel like they're a part of the faith community because they fall outside. Huh?
I said, that's horrible. That's the enemy. The enemy has a foothold here. The number one tool that Satan has is to divide us. And I think he's done such an amazing job. And when you look at the internet and you look at the different algorithms that take you down these little rabbit holes when you're online or you're on YouTube or you're on whatever social media site you're on, I bet that if you and I exchange phones, and Kevin, our producer, and I were talking about this, I think you talked about that with him as well. If we exchange phones and we just started going down and looking that thing up, I think I would get 100% different stories, different podcasts, different people talking about it, different information, or information put a completely different way. There is an individual who was the whistleblower in a lot of this stuff. His name was Nick Shirley. And Nick Shirley is a podcaster. He is not a Trump person. I don't know who he voted for. He does tend to be a little bit more on the conservative side, but you watched, he does. There's no doubt. I'm not trying to take away from it.
I've
But
watched the clips. He does
okay,
have a political leaning.
he does. He does. I'm not. I wasn't trying to take away from that. But if you
He also
watch,
isn't he also the one that ran for office in Minneapolis? Didn't he run for?
I am not. I've never heard that. Hold on, I'm going to look that up because I don't know if that's true. Again, I'm not saying it's not. I want to look that up. That's the first time I've ever heard that,
It
and
was
I've
either Nick
watched
Shirley or it
million
was
podcasts and read 1,000 articles on this thing. Has Nick
it was either
Shirley
Nick Shirley or it was somebody that he is partnered with.
run for office? I'm just going to say run for office, whether it's there or anywhere. Let's see. Nick Shirley has not run for any office. He's a political influencer known for his reporting on issues such as child care fraud in Minnesota. So no, he is not. It might be that guy that came through that had all of those reports from Minneapolis that he was reading through showing some of this fraud. That might be that guy. I don't know what his name is. But
Yeah,
anyway, my point is when you look at him, when you listen to conservatives, when you listen to Republicans, when you listen to Fox News, when you listen to even Joe Rogan, who was a liberal, who has now kind of moved a little bit more towards the right. I consider him a strong independent. I don't think he has a political leaning, but you listen to those
no,
individuals. Yeah, I think if anything, he was really, really, really Democratic. He was very liberal.
I'm talking about now with his podcast.
His podcast, he's more middle of the road, I would say. I listen to his podcast all the time. I think the guy's brilliant. I think he's hilarious. I love the guy. I really do. Huge Joe Rogan fan.
I believe that. Oh, I do. I do. Listen to. I'm sorry, that wasn't a. I just mean that I think from what I've heard of him and what I've listened to him and the bits and pieces that I know about him and you align on more than what you would probably disagree on. I'm not saying you're
I
an
agree.
acolyte or a.
but he's also very socially liberal. I mean, when you listen to what he has to say, they lost him. The Democratic Party has talked about getting a Joe Rogan because they needed Joe Rogan, and it's like you had a Joe Rogan. You upset him, you marginalized him because you went so far to the left. What are you doing? You had him. You had a Joe Rogan. You had Joe Rogan. So anyway, you listen to those individuals, and they talked about Nick Shirley being a podcaster or an influencer or a slightly conservative. And then you listen to like CNN, or you listen to some of the more left leaning podcasts, and he was a MAGA conservative. He was a MAGA this and MAGA. They kept putting that MAGA in there when he has nothing to do with the Trump administration. He has nothing to do. He doesn't go out there and talk about how awesome Trump is all the time or anything like. Where does that come from? But that's the spin they put on it. And that's the type of stuff that just frustrates me. All this stuff about ICE, you're getting two completely different views. One, ICE are these homegrown, they're citizens, they're proud Americans, they're well trained, they're police officers, they're all these
I
things.
would
Hold on, let me finish. I'm getting to the other side, and then by all, because I do want to hear your point on this. But you're hearing all these things that they are trying to do their job, and these people are stopping them. And where in the world does peaceful demonstration mean trying to literally get in the way or block and do all these things? There's that whole thing, and you hear it from that side, and it's all of that, and it ramps up that the side on the right, and then you've got this other group of people that talk about them being Nazis, Gestapo, jackbooted thugs that are out to hurt people and shoot people, and they're indiscriminate and all this stuff, and they have no training and they're morons and all this stuff, and I've heard all those things right down to the morons. Like trying to make it seem like they're less intelligent than the other law enforcement when right there in Minneapolis, 80 police officers left the Minnesota Police Department and joined ICE. Right there out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. So you see these two sides and how they're pulling at each other, and these algorithms take us down these rabbit holes to keep feeding us all those things that are getting us, for me, more and more and more to the right. And that's why I think it's so important for me to listen to everything else and to have conversations with you to kind of bring me back to balance, because I'm only hearing one side. And if I allow the algorithms to take me down that way, I'm just going to be a part of this issue. I'm going to become part of the problem where I'm so far on one side that I can't stand the other side. I love the other side. I love people that disagree with me. And you know, it's one of the things that I enjoy about this. And it's now this is why I do it. I want to hear what you have to say. I want to hear your opinion. And I think we need to stop this garbage. I think we've got to break these algorithms, because I think these algorithms are a tool of the enemy to divide us and to continually pull us apart. And I think it could split the church. And I never want to see that happen. We are we are from Jesus. We are the church. And I don't know how you stop this machine, but I tell you what, I think it's a powerful force tearing this country completely in two. And I think it feeds politics. People are far more willing to give money to campaigns, so the politicians are propagating all this garbage. It's good for viewership for the networks, for CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News. It's good for the podcasters because they can put clickbait out there and get you to click on it and keep clicking on more and more of their videos. All of this stuff is set up to tear us apart. And this is the biggest issue we have. And this is why I like what we have to say, because again, this has to be about love. It has to be about Jesus. And if I'm wrong and I need to move off of an issue, or I need to see people in a different light, Mike, I rely on you to help me do that.
That's my prayer every day. Lord, help me to see what it is that I'm not seeing. Why do people that I care about and love with my whole heart, the smartest people that I know, why why are my political views so vastly different from them? And Jesus, if I have scales on my eyes and I need to have those removed, then my prayer is you would remove them so I can see things the way that they see them, or at least understand them. And I think what we're doing right here goes a long way in preparing my heart for that. It's like, okay, so it's one thing to say you lean left or you lean right or you're a MAGA or you're a never Trumper or whatever label. Because I think labels and T-shirts go a long way in propagating what we're talking about right now. You can say a lot in a four word, no more than four words on the front of your T-shirt, and you're making a statement. I think what you and I are doing right now kind of is the antithesis of that. It's the opposite. Okay, what can we talk about that we can find common ground on and dovetail the two stories together to say, yeah, but we grew up in the same household. We had the same parents, but we didn't grow up with the same people. But in saying that,
I got the
in saying that,
I got the more mellow version.
yeah, it was like uh, yeah, they were just different. But
Hey, there was
anyway,
that
that's
one
for
time
a different.
spanked.
That's
I clearly remember the one time that I got spanked, and it hurt. It hurt. It hurt right here.
when you got what?
Spanked. Dad spanked me. There might have been. I'm just saying.
Dad choked me, so
What did you do? What did
I
you
took his
do?
car for a ride. I'm not saying I
Well,
didn't deserve it. I'm just
there you
saying
go.
different parenting skills. He evolved by the time he had his youngest son
Do you remember when he dislocated his arm swinging at me? Do you remember that?
because
He was in a
you left the
cast of
grill on
arms.
or something in the backyard or
We were playing baseball. So dad handled the original altercation so extremely well. It was such great fatherly advice. And he walks out there. He just, son, come with me. I want to show you something in the backyard. We walk back there and he shows me this, they had a really nice lawn. And he's like, do you see what you did over here where you tore up my lawn and you made a little pitcher's mound here? Nice, but you're ruining my lawn. And then do you see where we painted this shed that you're playing strikeout against? And you're throwing this little wiffle ball as hard as you can. And this, why did we move here? We moved here because there's this huge park and it's a block away. I counted it. It was like 400 steps. So it's right there. I can see it.
he
I
didn't
can see
count those steps.
all you have to do is walk over there. It's a 5-minute walk. It's right there. Don't do this in my yard anymore. By the way, mow the lawn today, clean this up, plant grass seed here, get this all cleaned up. No more wiffle ball in the backyard. And he leaves. And so my friend Mike comes over and, hey, let's play. It's like, okay, well, we got to get it quick because I got to mow the lawn. So we're playing and dad drove by and I saw his car and I thought, was that dad? And I wanted to believe that it wasn't. And then, I threw one more pitch and I turned around and dad was coming through. he, he took that giant swing and instinctively I just fell. I just fell back and he barely missed me. He reparted my hair from left to right with the air that was moving when that giant arm of his swung over the top of me and he got to about here and I saw his face and he went, ooh. And I'm like, oh no. And he just turned around and went in the house. I mowed the lawn. I weeded the lawn. I trimmed the bushes. I swept. I
You, you
ever
planted
looked
astroturf
good.
and striped the field.
5 hours I was in there. I was out there just cleaning everything up. When I walked in, he's sitting there and he's got this face and his arm was swelled and it was black and blue. And mom pointed at it and said, you're grounded until that heals. Oh, jeez. I'm probably not getting married at this point, but so I did. I think I pissed off dad enough to cause him a little stress. So all that to say, your point well taken. We came out of the exact same household, and yet we wound up, with completely different political leanings. I came into mom and dad one was in
My
fifth
point is
grade.
not completely. I mean, I'm not liberal leaning. I consider myself a conservative, but there are driveways I won't drive down, and there are things that I feel strongly about that don't align with what you do. But like I said, Tom, when we started this, corruption and fraud steals money from people that need it most, and whatever we can do to eradicate that and solve that problem, I'm all for. I just think we need to do it in the right way so that we're not hurting people along the way, and it's not a cruel process that we have to live through, because I don't think that's the way God has it designed. I don't think we're meant to be cruel
I don't think
in
so
an
either.
effort to be right. I think
Can we
those two
deport?
things are
Can we be Christian? Can we be loving and still deport people that are defrauding our system?
deport them if the circumstances are that they need to be deported. If there's an opportunity, if there's any opportunity for them to be able to be here legally and live their life and not be in a war-torn country like their home country is. And I mean, why would we kick them out just because they came from Somalia and we've let other people in that were coming from it? How do you decide which ones stay and which ones don't? Who gets to sit in the judgment seat and say, huh?
I said, I think you have to look at the ones that have deportation orders. This is the part that really upsets me is that you've got Democratic lawmakers who are fighting ICE and fighting the administration and fighting deportation, the judges that have issued these based on fraud, based on criminal activity, based on all these things. Deportation orders are issued based on legal fact, and they still fight it, and they still hide them, and they won't even take prisoners. So people that Minnesota law enforcement has put in prison, they won't give those individuals up for deportation. It's like, why would you fight a judge that has a legal deportation order and they're still fighting? That's the law of the land. That is federal law, and they're still fighting it. They should be criminally charged for fighting the US government. We're not in a state of civil war. The federal government has jurisdiction over state and local government. They do. That's federal law. You have to abide. You have to give those persons, and they won't. They just won't. They think they're bigger than the US government. I don't understand. I don't understand how federal agents aren't going down and arresting those politicians that won't abide. I mean, Fry, the mayor of Minneapolis, I really think that guy should be in jail. He's fighting US government and then fighting their authority. Everybody's upset at this administration for stopping payments of certain, funds to go towards these social programs because they won't stop the corruption. They've made no effort to do so. So until the corruption stops, they're cutting off federal aid. And what about all those people? It's like half of it's going to fraud. And some of that stuff is being funneled back to Somalia, and some of the stuff funneled back to Somalia are going to terrorist organizations. They're finding links. Now, again, there's people that say, no, that's true. I'm sure all this will come out in the investigation, but I'm frustrated by it. And so I guess I'll ask the question again. Can we be Christian? Can and still go through and stop the corruption? Can we still go through and deport people that have committed crimes? And how do they go about doing that? If would there be all these issues? Would there be all this violence and stuff like that in Minneapolis if the local authorities would be willing to do the law, to willing to enact the law and give up people that have legal deportation orders, not indiscriminate, because that stuff shouldn't be there. They should go through and have to get a court order and all that stuff. I agree with that, but there's got to be the right way to do it. And it's amazing how all this stuff really started coming up. All this fight, all the agitation, all of the protests and stuff like that, all seemed to come up when all of this fraud was really starting to hit. And people were talking about these links to these local politicians, to Fry, to Waltz, to all of these folks that are out there. And all of a sudden, no one's talking about fraud anymore, and they're only talking about ICE. And all the rhetoric isn't about, hey, I silenced everybody. I silenced all these people. I nailed down on these whistleblowers. No one's talking about that. Everybody's talking about Trump bad, Trump bad, Trump bad, Trump bad. It's Trump. And nothing about what they're doing and all the fraud that they're caught up in. It's just very convenient that all that stuff happened. I know. I went off on another tangent. I think there's a Christian this to be done. We are a nation founded on Christian ideals.
But I think there has to be, like I said, I think it's more tactical. It's more the means by which we're trying to achieve these goals than it is the goals themselves. And I think that gets lost in the conversation, especially, well, not especially, but in the church as well as at the diner or at work or around the water cooler. I don't think Christians are absolved from it or unaffected by it. I think it's conversation that happens in small groups. And I just think we need to find a way to solve the issue without being, like I said, it's just the overtly cruel tactics that are taking place that bother me. I can't justify it in my heart that I'd be willing to let somebody stay in this country that doesn't have his legal papers if it meant that another family that needed aid or needed help or needed a hand up got what they needed in order to survive. Otherwise, what are we doing? What are those funds set up for? So it's again, like I said, my struggle has more to do with how we're doing it than it is what is our goal at the end of this? What are we trying to achieve? And Jesus wasn't caught up in the he sat at the well with the woman that, he knew he was going to be ridiculed for. He was going to pay a penalty for that, even if it was just how people thought of him. But he chose to be intentional about what he did. He turned the tables in the synagogue and the money changers and created, at great personal risk, because the leadership of the church didn't like what he was saying or doing, and he was going to draw attention to himself. He didn't really put much thought into that. It was there's a wrong that needs to be righted, and he was going to make that happen. Me as a follower, all I'm looking for is, what will God want me to do? What does Jesus want me to do in this situation? How do I love somebody else on behalf of him and love them towards him? And the rest of it falls wherever it falls. That's not my burden to carry. That's not in my book bag. My book bag is to take care of people, and when they need something, to provide that need and not take the credit for it, but to point to Jesus and say, hey, this is this is because Jesus loves you, and you know here's a good church that you could get involved in.
It's amazing how non-political Jesus was. He just, again, I know we talked about this before, but he just didn't care about the politics. He didn't care about Rome and their politics. He didn't come here to build an earthly kingdom. He came here to build a heavenly kingdom, and he cared about people. He wants to make heaven crowded. He wants people to be in glory with his Father, and he just didn't care about politics. And how many times did that same church leadership you were talking about try to nail him down, try to trip him up with political questions, and he just never took the bait. He
Yeah, I
just
don't
didn't.
know. I mean, Rome was a problem, but it was the hierarchy in the church that he was at odds with, or seemingly occupied most of his time. So we can point and say politics is making this difficult, but as the church, aren't we supposed to be set that aside? I mean, yes, we pay to Caesar what is Caesar's, but more important than that, a couple of steps ahead of that, is we're supposed to be doing what Jesus wants us to do as his followers. We call ourselves a Christian, and then we're willing to take the cruelty and say, well, yeah, but the greater good is, we're going to solve our border problems, and we're going to put our tax dollars back where they're supposed to be. I understand that, but is that really what Jesus was all about? Is that where he spent his time and focus? I don't think so. I don't. I
Henceforth,
don't.
ye shall deport. You were talking about t-shirts, and I bought one today that I absolutely loved. And I think it's actually pertinent because it was, if Paul was around today, we'd be getting a letter, or he'd be writing us a letter. And I
Yeah.
just thought it was so perfect because it really went along with exactly what we've been talking about tonight. That that the church needs to be about left. Needs to be about right. It needs to be about what is right,
Gross.
not the right side. It needs to be about what is right. It needs to be about truth. But does the right have a hold on the truth, the complete truth, the total truth? Does a left have this cornered market or anything? No, it's we're being led astray. We're being ripped apart. The truth should always be what we strive, and the truth is and what the Bible says, and nothing more. So
What would Paul's first letter to the Toledoans say?
remove your headeth from
Wherever it's at,
yes from its current location
from the crease that it is in.
and see. Which reminds me of one of our dad's favorites. You need a glass belly button because your head is so far.
He did have a lot of fun ones.
He had a lot of those lines. I've used some of them. I've used some of them on my kids. So, well, this was fun. I enjoyed it immensely, as
Yeah.
always.
Yeah,
And I
me too.
love there is. I think there is a lot of alignment here. As far as what we believe on this one. I think I'm a little bit more towards the. I think people need to be vetted on the front side, that we have a legal process. Does the immigration policy need to change? Yeah, probably. Do we need to right size it? Yeah, probably. We've got a demographic issue. We need hardworking people to come here. But I get caught up a little bit in the numbers. I get caught up in a little bit of the maybe too much so on making sure that we get the right people in. I want to be Christian about this. I want to give people every opportunity. But the one thing I'll end my point on is that some really smart people have said in the past that you can have open borders or you can have liberal social programs and fraud. You can't have both because the way this thing is going, it's gonna bankrupt us. We're $37 trillion in debt. We got to get our financial house in order, and this fraud and bringing in everybody that winds up on on the corporate dole, or the government dole, it's not a winning formula for us. So we got to figure this stuff out. So, well, I love you.
I'm reminded that we're not building a team here to compete. We're building a democracy that we're trying to survive in, and democracy should not be for those that are already on the inside. There should be opportunity and the right way. And you're right. There are some things that probably need calibrating, and I don't think it should be at the expense. I don't think you throw the flare into the gas can to try to save the gas can. I think what you really need to do is be intentional about it, be precise about it, make sure that you're not harming innocent people or being cruel to people for the sake of achieving that one goal. And I think as long as we stick to that or stay along those lines, I think we have a better plan in place
I agree. All right.
for
Well,
what
I
it's
love
worth.
you. That was awesome. I always enjoy hearing your opinions. Sorry if I dominated too much conversation. I'm pretty passionate
Well,
about
no,
this
I
subject.
said in the beginning, I said, this is something you talked about this for a couple of weeks touching on this subject. So it really felt like it was a passion in your heart. And really what I wanted to do was just keep, throwing stuff up there that you could swing at and get your point across. And I was good with that. So no, I think that's absolutely the way that this was going to go. So,
All
so,
right. Well, have a great night, and we'll sign off.
all right. Love you, brother. Hugs to
Love
your
you.
family, and hopefully everybody's doing well.